Welcome to Golf and the Good Life, your guide to golf travel across the pond. I'm DJ Jones. He's Connor Evers, and today we are going to cover some tips and advice as it relates to small groups who are planning an overseas golf trip. But before we get there, Connor, really looking forward to being up with you guys at H&B HQ next week. What's the latest and greatest up in Cincinnati?
Well, good DJ. Appreciate the intro. And yeah, looking forward to having you up here next week and for your quarterly meeting up here and coming up. So looking forward to seeing you though in person. But all good here at HQ. We've had quite a few groups, you know, travel in June and coming up until kind of the meaty part of the season, if you will. But we've had HEB members traveling from Hacienda Golf Club, Fox Hill Club, Saucon Valley Country Club, Ballyneal Golf Club, and last but not least, Denver Country Club. And why I say last but not least, one of the group members of the group was sending me kind of their favorite sticky toffee pudding rankings from across the pond. Looks like Percy French at the Sleeved Honored was number one, which is surprising because Bushmills is quite good. But shout out to that group as well, going over and yeah, just looking forward to the rest of the season. Can't believe how fast it's going. I keep saying that on every pod, but all good here, Deej.
I don't think it gets any more embracing golf and the good life than ranking your favorite sticky toffee puddings across the
Mm-hmm.
trip. I mean, that is a pro move if there ever was one. I was gonna ask if they had made it to Bushmills because I don't have the itinerary in front of me, but yeah, if they made it there and that one still didn't win out, that we got to get to Percy French is what I'm is
do
what
you
I'm hearing.
do you have a favorite?
Well, I mean, I by default, it kinda is Bushmills. I feel like it's an
Yeah.
H&B requirement. I dined at Percy French, it's probably been it's been before the recent renovation, and I don't remember if I had it there
Mm.
or not. Actually, I actually think I didn't have dessert because I walked up to New Gelato up the street, but we could, obviously, we could talk about pastries and ice cream and so forth all day, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk golf, and, it's coming up on a pretty prime time for golf fans, at least links golf fans, with the Scottish Open at Renaissance Club on the move, and, of course, followed immediately by the Open Championship at Royal Troon. I'm always bummed that the Irish Open moved off of its old slot on the calendar of July 4th week because we used to have the Irish Open, the Scottish Open, and the Open Championship, and it was just 3 amazing weeks. My letters to the DP World Tour have gone unresponded as far as lobbying to move it back, but nevertheless, 2 great weeks. Look forward to seeing our friends on the small screen over here. But back to today's episode, we are talking small group golf trips. And throughout this episode, we're going to cover, some specific things that you need to keep in mind if you're traveling as part of a smaller group, some things that you're just not going to be able to do perhaps as a smaller group, and some logistic stuff that you just have to be aware of as you go through the planning process. But there's also some pretty key advantages to traveling as a small group, and we'll cover those as well. But Connor, let's kind of start at the beginning because small group can be a pretty relative term. How would you define, or how does H&B define a small group when it comes to overseas golf travel?
Yeah, Deej, absolutely. And essentially, you took the words out of my mouth. Relative is kind of the key term there. And really, what constitutes a small group is a group of less than 4 golfers, so a two or a threesome. Obviously, it depends on the group. If there's a couples group and say that the wives don't play, but the gents do, again, just two or three golfers. The other thing is maybe thinking, oh, what about one golfer? For a number of reasons, us in particular, we do not craft itineraries for single golfers. We're going to get into some more of the specific details, the reasons why, and what you can do. But again, that could be just a single golfer going out and playing. That could also be husband and wife, and say that the gentleman just plays golf. But like I said, we'll get into the details of why we don't. But again, to kind of go back and of what constitutes a small group, less than 4 golfers.
That's good intel, and the reason that we start there, if you've spent any amount of time in, say, the UK and Ireland, you've seen the giant tour buses that are packed to the gills of folks going to some of the the big sightseeing spots. And even in the golf travel business, some of these groups coming off the cruise ships and so forth, you can get some really large parties. So, what one company thinks is small, someone else may not. But at least in terms of our conversation today, some of the things that you're going to have to keep in mind, they really only apply to these groups of two or three golfers. And what kind of inspired this was, not long ago we had received an inquiry from a gentleman that he was planning a trip, and in the course of his email, he said something along the lines of, "I'm just a group of 2, can you still help me? I know that I'm, a smaller party, what have you." And I got to thinking about this, and I realized, this is something that we hear pretty often. When somebody completes the form on our website or whatever where it says how many golfers, they'll put just 2.
Mm.
And there's a lot kind of hiding underneath that word "just." Because it feels like in a way what some of them are saying is, "I know you'd rather work with a bigger group, but can you help me? Can I do business with you?" Is more or less sometimes what's not being said, but is kind of the impression that you're getting.
Mm.
And it's really kind of unfortunate, especially at the beginning of a process that's supposed to be pretty exciting. And I guess I understand where some of it comes from. There are some companies that they basically will pre-build trips, they'll book the tee times and the hotels and so forth, and then go out and sell it, and those are usually, designed for groups of 4, 8, 12, 16, whatever, and so the group of 2 is saying, "Look, where does that leave me? Maybe they can't help me," and that kind of thing. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that approach to planning, but for in terms of H&B, and not to go down a rabbit hole on this particular aspect, but we start every planning process, every trip with a blank sheet of paper. And so that level of customization means that it doesn't matter how many are in your party. Granted, you need a minimum of 2 golfers, like Connor was saying, but you're going to receive the same experience and the same service, whether you're a group of 2 or 20. And part of that is we embrace those small groups because we know, look, that group of 2 over the course of the relationship with that member is potentially going to grow into a group of 100 by the time repeat trips and referrals and introductions and so forth are all taken into account. So you don't have to come into it thinking that you're, to use a restaurant analogy, that you're going to get stuck at the back table next to the kitchen door. You're going to get the same level of service no matter how many are in your party, but there are some things that you have to keep in mind if you're a group of 2 or 3. And for that, Connor, you are the planning guru here. Walk us through some of the stuff that a small group needs to keep in mind as they get going in the planning process.
Yeah, it's a good question, and appreciate that all the information you just kind of laid out, DJ, with what we do with twos, and love loving on my twos, which is great. But just some considerations that I'll have the conversation with, and we're just very like candid and honest with kind of the things folks need to consider when booking as a two, and potentially they, if it's a couple, they may even with the information I'll provide here in a second, they may look at potentially going and adding another couple or such, just with kind of the requirements. And the requirements, like I'll mention, aren't so much through us, it's the clubs. We'll start the Home of Golf, the Old Course. A lot of groups will call, and we'll chat with groups of 2 that are looking to book an Old Course guaranteed time, and that's great. And the one thing that is kind of a little bit, it is a difficulty when booking a guaranteed time as a 2 is, as we've mentioned before, we're an authorized provider of the St. Andrews Links Trust tee times within the Old Course. And when we receive our allotment of times, they come in perfect foursomes. So essentially, we have to book groups via a guaranteed time with perfect foursomes. So again, goes back to potentially finding another 2 golfers, or going through the ballot process, or applying for guaranteed times the year prior of intended play too. So we have another podcast on the Old Course, how it all works. Would go back to that as well, and we get a little bit more deep dive into the twos on that. So that's kind of the Old Course. Again, just a consideration when looking at this. The other one is Muirfield. A lot of groups like to play it, but with Muirfield, you can play as a 2, but you must pay for the other 2 slots that you're playing with. So you essentially pay for the whole foursome. Now, if the club can find another two to play with you on that certain day, what they will do is they will then refund you. Again, they're only open Tuesdays and Thursdays each week. You have to find that specific day. Also, the time preference, they have an 18 hole and a 36 hole day preference as well. So everything has to essentially line up for that to work out and then to refund you. But vice versa, you could call and get extremely lucky and find that someone else did the same thing and slot you in and they would refund them too. So sometimes it works with them, but it's just one of those things. Again, we just have to walk through with our groups on that process. And just another, couple clubs, and mostly this is just comes from the top clubs from across the pond. You're able to book in twos, but you'll find at a lot of clubs the ideal tee times of 9 a.m. to noon or so, give or take. Those are pretty much set aside for groups of that are in perfect foursomes. They would rather be able to sell a group of 4, 8, 12, 16, and those ideal times kind of make it easier than putting it to kind of in those ideal times. A lot of times you'll find you're usually going off before 9 or around there, or an afternoon tee time. Depends on the club. Kind of nice thing too is North Berwick. They will pair you up with another two that actually has kind of similar handicaps for pace of play reasons. And a lot of times you just have no say in what time you'll kind of play. So again, I would say it's a disadvantage, just something to, like I said, to consider. And the other thing is kind of off of the golf courses and tee times are fixed costs. Such as transportation. Essentially the more people you have in a group, the less money your package price will be, just because again, those transportation costs are a fixed cost. So I guess that's just kind of my considerations for twos on that basis. All good there, Deej?
Yeah, I mean, it's all great stuff. I mean, what I'm hearing is be flexible. And of course, that
Yes.
I feel like that applies, to I don't care how big your group is, but if you're a small group, you've got to be flexible, and especially if you're hoping to play, some of these marquee courses. And the fixed cost thing, that makes total sense. If you've only got a group of two and you want to hire a driver host, you're splitting that cost two
Mm-hmm.
ways instead of eight ways. So,
Right.
but on the flip side of that coin, there are a number of advantages for having a small group. Granted, the majority of our groups are still these larger parties, 8, 12, 16, whatever it might be, but there's some definite upside to traveling with a smaller group. Number 1 starts at the very beginning. You have fewer opinions, fewer family schedules, fewer obligations to work around and to try to line up a day on the calendar and where you're going and all of the specifics. Doing that amongst a group of 12 versus a group of 2 or group of 3, it's a whole lot easier when you've got fewer things to juggle there. But the other thing we find is that once many of our groups get overseas, they are absolutely hooked on links golf. And especially right now, here it is. Tomorrow is, as we're recording this, is the solstice, and it's going to be daylight till like 11:30 at night. And so, if you have a morning tee time and you want to play again in the afternoon, it is a whole lot easier to find an emergency 18 somewhere as a group of two than it is as a group of 12. And so you open up some opportunities there in terms of the logistics of the trip. You're probably gonna be a self-drive. It might be 50-50. Half of our small groups tend to go the self-drive route, and as we discussed on the episode about self-drive, at that point, the world is your oyster in terms of exploring. If you wanna play a morning round of golf and then go on a 4-hour drive around the coast, do it by all means. Whereas if you have a driver host, you're kinda locked into a set number of hours each day. Granted, on the upside, you're getting the service and the carefree travel, but the trade-off is, as a self-drive, you're getting to see so much more of the country potentially. From an accommodation standpoint, you open up some options as far as some shared lodges. So many of the places, Turnberry and Adair Manor and Doonbeg and so forth, they have these nice, multi-bedroom lodges. So you can build some camaraderie among the group, having a shared space. And then I think one of the biggies that gets overlooked is restaurants. So many of the restaurants overseas are considerably smaller than they are on our side of the Atlantic. There are some places, a group of 12, you're just kind of out of luck. The other day we were planning for one of our groups who was dining down in Southwest Ireland. There was a Michelin star place that we were trying to arrange, and we realized, oh shoot, they actually only seat six or less, and this was a group of eight. They were out of luck. As a small group, you don't have that problem. Every door is open in terms of that. But Connor, you touched earlier on singles,
Yeah.
and there are no doubt a lot of folks listening who are out there either traveling solo, maybe they've got one extra day free on another trip that they've planned with a significant other, and they want to squeeze in a round of golf. What kind of tips would you offer that solo golfer out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think really what it comes down to, it encompasses is a lot of the courses overseas, and kind of what I said too is kind of the reason why we don't, do any itineraries for single golfers is a lot of these courses, they actually won't book single golfers far in advance as we do for normal bookings. The reason why is they'd rather, try and get maybe a group of three on the books and then get that single golfer in there later. So a lot of times they're able to fill those, open slots with a single golfer, here and there. I mean, it can be, a few weeks prior to that tee time, or maybe even just the week of. It doesn't make sense essentially just with that information for us to work with one. So also wanted to fill in that gap of maybe someone's asking, hey, why don't you? And that's essentially the reasoning why. But just like as Deej said, if you are a single golfer, I mean, kind of the big points and tips to do and going over is just send an email, introduce yourself, say you're looking, to play by yourself, see if there's any opening slots on the tee sheet. A lot of the clubs will get back to you, usually within 24 hours and be able to assist and maybe just describe the process. I mean, it may be a slower day where they're able to do that, a few weeks or months out. But they may also say, hey, keep tight. We'll let you know on X date. And again, it could be about a week out or so. We actually had a listener email us a while back, and he was traveling solo, asked us some for advice on how to do this, and we kind of told him again kind of what we're saying to everyone right now, and he ended up getting on a few marquee courses. I think Prestwick was one of them, if I remember correctly. I can't remember the others, or maybe Portrush. I can't remember which one it was, but just took the advice and was able to do that. And also be flexible when doing this. I mean, you could be over in the West Coast and you could only get Royal Troon, and you might not be able to get some other courses as a single, and you may have to jump around and drive around a lot around the country. So if you expect to be in St. Andrews and play all the top courses as a single, I mean, it could work, but also just having the back of your mind that you may need to travel around depending on where you're at. And also back to St. Andrews, if you are heading to home of golf in St. Andrews and wanting to try to play the old course, always advise groups, base yourself there, as long as you possibly can, up to a full week, and enter the daily singles draw, essentially every day. That does happen the day before intended play now. But that is kind of your way of getting on as a single as well. So there's always a chance, but I would say use those tips to your advantage, and hopefully you'll be able to score, it's the times and the places you want to play.
Yeah, that's great advice. And the only thing I would add to that is to put yourself out there online as well. There is a vibrant golf travel community on social media, and I think you'd be surprised how often it leads to folks finding a game, whether it's somebody local that's happy to host, or maybe somebody that has a trip on the books and somebody had to drop out, at the last minute, and they're looking for someone to fill a round sort of thing. It happens actually more often than you'd think. I subscribe to the Golfer's Journal. Everybody who loves the game of golf should, in my opinion. And they have a message board on Discord. There's a board for Scotland and Ireland and so forth, and I participate fairly often. And all the time, I'm seeing someone post, "Hey, I'm going to be in Edinburgh for 2 days. Where should I play?" And somebody messages back, "Hey, I'm a member at North Berwick. Send me a DM, or come join us on our trip. We had a guy that can't make it, at the last minute." That stuff happens. It happens more regularly than you think. So put yourself out there. You never know where it will lead in terms of finding some games overseas. But Connor, we've covered some terrain here as far as small groups goes. Before we wrap it up, anything that we missed along the way?
No, I think there's a good point, Deej, and to your point, I mean, put yourself out there. It happened perfectly with me. I was overseas by myself, solo golf, Prestwick. I get chatting with the group on the practice green. They were teeing off before me. Their fourth had to go back to Wisconsin for a business meeting last minute, and he left, and they just I just got chatting with them, nice gents, and they're like, hey, would you like to join us for Troon tomorrow? Tea time, caddy's already paid for, all that, and ended up playing with them. So you just don't know. Just it happened with me. So one example of many. So, but this is a great episode. Really enjoyed it, and best of luck to all of our groups, small groups, as we kind of mentioned, traveling overseas, and appreciate everyone listening.
Absolutely. And that's a great story. How many times have we said, stuff has a funny way of coming together across the pond? But thank you, as always, to everyone for tuning in out there. We have compiled all of this into a guide that's on our website. We will, of course, link to that in the show notes, as well as a few other resources as well. We will be back again in a couple weeks with another episode. But until then, we wish you plenty of golf at its finest and life at its best.